We've got folks from Germany, the Netherlands, Chicago, Los Angeles, Portugal, Brazil, and living in New York, Slovenia, Huntington Beach, California. I think I know who that is. Linda, nice to have you here. Lots of folks from all over. All right, so we're a couple minutes in. We've got a good group of folks showing up. Welcome to actually our second webinar. Encode.org has been putting on workshops all over the world since we started almost 2 years ago. But we've only just begun doing webinars. We had one a few months back, kind of focused on the legal structures. We had some technical issues, so if you were present for that one, welcome back. Thank you for giving this another run. This webinar is of a more general nature. We have about 90 minutes scheduled for this. We'll run through some just presentations to do some initial framing and probably stop along the way for any questions you might have. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box. Again, there's a Q&A button. If you're seeing that and so inclined, feel free to launch your questions there. And also there's the raise hand button. So that should get our attention one way or the other with Ra here, myself. Otherwise, we'll just kind of take us through the presentation and kind of give you an orientation to what we've been up to the last couple of years. For those that don't know me, I'm Tom Thomason. I'm one of the founding members of Encode.org, one of 3 founding members. We use that kind of as a special distinction. We make a lot of distinctions that we'll be talking about. One is to rethink, redefine what it means to be a founder or an owner of these self-organizing, self-managed entities. So I identify as a founding member, one of 3, that launched Encode.org about 2 years ago. Before that, I was also a co-founder with Holacracy One, where Brian Robertson and I launched that company in 2007 to promote, extend, and to deploy Holacracy all over the world. I have a little bit to say about that. And then before these last 2 initiatives, I've been kind of a reluctant entrepreneur over the last 30 years. Encode is actually my 6th entrepreneurial endeavor over about 3 decades. So I've been involved in all kinds of business activities, public, private, not-for-profit, big and small, and just kind of living in the organizational world for a very long time. And like so many of us, kind of frustrated with the status quo, which led me and Brian to launch Holacracy One about 12 years ago, to kind of usher in this new world of work. It's kind of funny. It's always, this is a truism, right? So it's always the new world of work. Wherever you are, there's something next. And this time, though, I think the new world that we're ushering in is fundamentally different. At least it has the capacity to be fundamentally different. It's been my experience over the last 10 years, especially with self-organizing systems. And there's a lot of activity here. So I kind of want to frame and ground us in what I mean when I talk about the new world of work and what Encode is doing to further this new world into our upgrading our conventional structures, if you will. So the new world of work to me has 5 markers, 5 very concrete things that I look for in new systems, new paradigms, new ways of thinking about work and our relationship to work and organizations. The first of those 5 is, in the new world of work, things are purposeful. So everything hangs on purpose. It's a shift to our focus and our energizing activity, moving away from personal power holding and inspired leaders, motivating us to follow them around their inspirational leadership, if you will, personal power holding. It's a shift to something else. It's a shift to a new pull, a new inspiration, one that invites all of us to participate, to express something that the world needs, to express something into the world that is needed. So in the new world of work, everything becomes purposeful. Purpose holds, if you will, all of our activity. Purpose aligns our work to something that we want to serve greater than ourselves, to serve a purpose greater than ourselves. So this is a fundamental shift, I think, moving away from conventional power systems and personal power holding to serving something greater than self, as represented by a purpose. I'll have a little bit more to say about that as we go along. The next marker is structure, a new structure. Fancy word for those of you not familiar with this, a holarchic structure or a natural hierarchy. So I've been doing self-organization for over a decade. Like I said, co-founded Holacracy One in 2007, and I've been kind of helping others to upgrade their organizational structures for the last 10 years. And what we have done with Holacracy is essentially replace one structure with a new structure. So a conventional management hierarchy with a new organic, natural hierarchy called a holarchy. And so the new world of work is not flat. This is the point that I want to make here. There's a lot of, I think, misconceptions around self-organization and equal participation and flat organizations. And in my experience, the new world of work is not about that. And this is a big deal. The new world of work is still structured. There is still a hierarchy. It's just a different hierarchy. We're accustomed to a power hierarchy of people. Now we have a hierarchy of purpose, if you will, structured to express work in pursuit of purpose. Again, I'll have more to say about this. Another marker for the new world of work is dynamic. The new world of work is moving away from static predict and control structures. Now, if you've been around the business world as long as I have, you know that we've all been socialized and rewarded for our abilities to predict and control the future. The sad thing is us humans are really bad predictors of the future. And so we want a different system in place to navigate towards purpose, one that is much less predictive, much less static, and much more responsive, lean, agile. You've heard all of these words. So the new world of work is about being dynamic, to be able to sense and respond in a moment to what's needed and move from now to next. It's a game of now and next. The next is autonomous. The new world of work instills a whole lot of autonomy. And I think this is super important. Fred Lelou, and I'll mention him a little bit later too, talks about bringing wholeness to work, bringing your whole self. And I think this is a really cool marker for the new world of work. The new systems that we're going to be talking about today inspire, instill, and encode a whole lot of autonomy, freedom to act, freedom to express yourself in pursuit of something bigger than yourself, a purpose that you care about. So a whole lot of autonomy shows up in the new world of work. And then the final marker is one of transparency. And I sometimes say as much transparency as you can stomach. So open book management on steroids, if you will, if you're familiar with that conventional concept. To have a high degree of visibility and transparency about everything so that we can steer better, so that we can lead better, so that we can express purpose better based on real data, real information. So I start here because a whole lot of press is out there about the new world of work and these new paradigms, and they kind of tend to be a little aspirational. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all work different and better together? Well, sure, but what are the concrete markers? What are we looking for in these systems? And so in my experience, these are 5 concrete markers that we want to see embedded in all of our work and business systems. And the cool thing is, from my experience, Holacracy embeds these 5 principles beautifully in the Constitution, in a rule set that bakes in the notion of everything for purpose, a new structure. Everything is dynamic, autonomous, and transparent. So we have a system of self-organization that bakes in these principles. And the interesting thing here is this is not new. So we talk about the new world of work, and yeah, there's some new elements for sure, but there have been early pioneers in self-organization for the last couple of decades, quite frankly. So we've had the usual suspects. Some of you may be familiar with the W.R. Gore organization, Valve, and Morningstar. These are folks that kind of sensed the limits of conventional organizational structures and systems and started to home grow their own, to find better ways to embed these principles, to show up with more autonomy, to change the management structure, to bring more transparency and visibility to the work, to bring, as Fred Lelou might call, more wholeness to your endeavors. So we've had these early pioneers, and one of the things that Holacracy One did 10 years ago was to take the work of the pioneers and actually create a system, a portable, repeatable, deployable system that embedded these rules to make it easy for those that wanted to upgrade their organizations to do so without having to grow their own or design their own, to do the hard work. So to benefit from the heavy lifting of the early pioneers, Holacracy One encoded a system called Holacracy, documented in a set of rules called the Constitution, so that everybody could play by a set of rules that embedded these principles of self-organization. So Holacracy, as I said, started this work about 10, 12 years ago, launched in 2007. And as a co-founder and one of the leaders in that organization, I had the privilege of a front row seat of deploying Holacracy all over the globe with some really cool companies, the new pioneers of self-organization, organizations that you may have heard of like Zappos and Arca, the cash management company, and the David Allen Company. And in the Netherlands, we have Springist and Energized and a whole bunch of new pioneers now taking these new structures and upgrading their organizations with a common rule set, the Constitution. So this is happening all over the world. And this movement of self-organization is really gaining momentum. This is no longer a niche thing. There are catalyzing movements all over the globe. I've mentioned a few times Fred Lelou's book. I'm sure many of you have read it or heard others talk about it. It's a beautiful expose on the developmental lineage or unfolding of organizations in the world from a developmental lens, and talks about what's possible with what's next as we move from conventional organizations to these new liberated organizations. There are conferences and seminars that are going on all over the world. The D10E conference that you see on your screen is spinning up to talk about everything decentralized. Decentralized organizations, decentralized decision-making, decentralized or disintermediated governance systems, the whole cryptocurrency. So decentralization and new organizing structures are kind of sweeping the globe. And this is not stopping. This is only getting bigger. And so I've been playing in this field, as I said, for about a decade and seeing the benefits. We have really done a great job of moving from the old power hierarchy, the very conventional structures, the management hierarchy, and replace that with something else, a system designed to express a purpose into the world. And so we've made great leaps in changing from a management hierarchy to a new structure, a new organizing structure. And it's from this ground that we can now see some new ways of taking these same principles into new systems. So, as I was doing this, it was like, wow, we could see the transformation that was happening when people could show up in a brand new system and have autonomy to lead, to see a purpose that they cared about, to have the visibility and the data they needed to make good decisions to help express that work into the world. So huge transformations of eliminating the need for management hierarchy, which is one definition of what holacracy is. It's a replacement, a wholesale replacement for management hierarchy. So I've been doing this for a while and seeing the huge benefits and the transformative effects that that has. And it dawned on me, it was like, as I was doing this, seeing all the benefits, it was like, well, wait a minute. We're talking about alternate ways of distributing power. and giving more autonomy to individuals. But what about the legal structures that still encodes power personally? What about these shareholders and a board and officers and directors and voting rights where power is still held personally? What about those systems? And how are those systems still anchored in 18th century, 19th century constructs? And there was a loophole actually with self-organization. Self-organization a la holacracy starts with a power holder that makes a decision that says, you know, my organization is better served if we institute a new self-organizing paradigm to embed these principles that we care about, to express purpose in the world, and so on. But it's still anchored back to that power holder. That individual power holder could have a bad day and say, you know what, this wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, and rescind the decision to change the structure. So there's like a loophole in the system, and it's a loophole that I would like to close. And then the other loophole, if you will, was we've done a great job eliminating the management hierarchy, so we don't have bosses or centralized authority as we conventionally hold it. But what are we still doing with employees? What's that about? Where employees are kind of a subservient class, if you will, still beholding to authority and regulations and compliance outside of its control. So we've eliminated the need for management hierarchy, but we still have employees. And we have an elegant self-organizing system to express cool work into the world, but we still have power holders that can trump in the form of officers, directors, shareholders. So it's like we left a couple systems behind. And holacracy gets a lot of kind of arrows in the back for being a pioneer. It's kind of a victim of its own success, if you will. It's created a new way, a new organizational system to express work in the world with new structures. But it's silent on the legal structure and silent on the people structures by design. So another way to think about holacracy is that it's a distinction event, a differentiation, not like a better way to improve on management structures, but an entirely new way to express organizational work into the world, one that makes a distinction between the people and the work, between role and soul, as it's called in holacracy speak, for those of you familiar with that system. So long story short, over the last couple years, while I was doing this work, it was like, what do we do? There's these lingering tensions. What do we do about the two systems that were left behind? And this is what gave rise actually to ENCODE. So a couple years ago, I wanted to do something about this. I'm kind of an entrepreneur, and one of my creative outlets is creating organizations that address problems in the world and see if other people can see these problems too and join in the effort. So a couple years ago, I started socializing the idea of what if we upgrade these other two systems to ENCODE, these same 5 principles that we've grown to love and care about in our organizational operating system, and now embed them in our 2 structures left behind, our legal system and our people systems. And this is exactly what gave rise to ENCODE.org and what we've been doing the last 2 years and what we want to share with you today. ENCODE.org has a purpose, of course, and its purpose is to go beyond employment, to eliminate the need for this class of citizen, if you will, this class of corporate citizen that's still lingering out there, the employee, and to upgrade that, to go beyond the need for employees and allow everybody to have a legal stake, to be a legal owner, if you will, a legal investor or member in the enterprise itself, and to end-to-end liberate purposeful work everywhere in the system. So not just in the organizational structure that expresses work, but also in the legal structure and the people structure. So we have a liberated system end-to-end where no power is held personally. It is a systemic approach to figuring out how to express purpose in the world, from the legal structures to the organizational structures and to the people structures. And so this is what we call the for-purpose enterprise. The for-purpose enterprise is one that reintegrates these 3 containers. So if you look at this little diagram, you can see the organization space. This is, in Holacracy speak, the conventional place where work gets done. Roles and accountabilities, and for most organizations practicing Holacracy or some other self-management or self-organizing system, this is where things start and stop. It's about getting work done. It's about getting work done differently without a management hierarchy, with a self-organizing or self-managed system. Cool. So we've done that. What ENCODE is now doing is taking the other two constructs, something we call the company structure, which is the legal anchor, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, and another structure, a collective of the people. So if we don't have employees, and for those of you practicing Holacracy, you know that people don't show up in the organizational whole. Let me see if I can correct that. All right, how about now? I'm gonna see if I get, yes, great, awesome. So thank you for that. So I think I left off when I saw all the chats coming through that we're creating a new cohesive system end to end, the for-purpose enterprise. And the interesting thing here, quite literally, we mean for purpose, legally for purpose. And for the business folks in the room and the entrepreneurs in the room, I mean this as a replacement for a for-profit organization, or a not-for-profit organization, or a B corporation, or an NGO. Those are all nice and interesting, valid legal structures. But what we're actually creating is a new structure that is legally anchored in for purpose. And this is the work of ENCODE. So I want to take you through this a bit. I will pause briefly here to see if there are any top of mind questions. Ra, I might ask you to check the Q&A section or any of the chats that are coming up to see if we have any questions. Is anybody lost in what we're talking about here? Upgrading the two systems that were left behind. This is the work of ENCODE to bring those 5 principles that we care about to the other 2 systems and integrate it back into the organizational structure. So I'll see if any questions come up or any chat questions come through. It looks like maybe everybody is tracking all right. All right, so let's drill down then a little bit more and break this down into the specifics. Let's start with the organization. So the folks that are practicing Holacracy, this should be familiar space. This is where the Constitution, the rules of the Constitution are operationalized. This is where the work of the organization gets done. Roles and accountabilities to express organizational work in pursuit of purpose. This is what happens in this container. So this is service delivery and sales and finance and legal and research and development, innovation, and all the things that we're accustomed to in organization life, expressing organizational work. This is what happens in the organization container. But it happens in a self-managed or self-organized fashion. So we have a rule set at play, and this is super important. Each of these containers has its own unique set of rules that help us to express what's needed to be expressed in each one of these contexts. So for the organization, it's actually pretty simple. We use the Constitution, the Holacracy Constitution. You could use another self-organizing or self-managed system here with some caveats that I can talk about in a little bit. But we'll focus on what I think is the most mature. Might have a little bit of a bias here for sure, but the most mature, robust self-organizing operating system available, the Holacracy Constitution. So in the organization, if you'll notice at the top right, there are two things to pay attention to. The focus here is always the work. And those of you that know me well know that I am full of pithy little statements. And one of my pithy little statements about organization space, it's a game of what is the work and where does it live and within what authorities? What is the work, where does it live, and within what authorities? That is what we're doing in organizational space or the organizational context. So it's not about the people. It's not about making people feel good or taking care of people actually in any way. Quite the contrary, we differentiate people from the work. And we have an organizational system designed to express organizational work in pursuit of purpose, a greater purpose that we care about. So this is the self-organizing space where we have clear rules. We have a clear management and control system that is robust and mature. And for us, what it feels like in this is that you have the ability to have better alignment with your work. And those of you that have been in a self-organized system know that this is one of the beneficial outcomes, clarity. With organizational clarity through roles and accountabilities in this new structure and the autonomy and visibility that arises, you have the unique ability to pick and choose and consciously align with the work and see and assess if that aligns with your own sense of purpose. So this is huge. These 5 principles that we talked about show up in this space. The ability to have autonomy to lead your role without any fear of personal power holders coming in and trumping your decisions or your work. Many opportunities, so you're no longer locked into the one-to-one correlation of job description, position description, title, etc. You have the freedom to roam about the organization and do things that inspire you. So there's a whole lot of liberation and freedom in this kind of space. So this is what's happening in the organizational container. The next is the company. So again, for the business folks in the room and the entrepreneurs, this is foundational. It's what gives a legal entity the right to exist. And the legal entity's right stems from a local jurisdiction. Somewhere in the world, there is a governmental institution that says we recognize business entities of different types and styles. In the US, we have the C corporations or the S corporations or limited partnerships, or the super common one now is the limited liability company, or the LLC. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the company structures. These are the legal structures that give an entity the right to exist in a state or local jurisdiction. So they legally anchor the entity. Again, things to pay attention to, 2 things. There's a focus where in the organization, the focus was exclusively on the work. What work is needed? How do we optimize that work to express the purpose that we care about? Here in the company, the focus is on the property, actually the legal assets, the capital and financial structures of the entity and who owns them. It's about ownership rights and assets, property rights, if you will. And we have a different set of rules that are operating in this space. Kind of colloquial named the operating agreement or shareholder agreement or bylaws. It goes by different names in different jurisdictions. But basically, we have a very concrete and detailed rule set, the operating agreement. So in the company, It specifies different classes of membership units or shares, if you will, and we upgrade this. So this is one of the key things that ENCODE is bringing to the world. One of the areas that we're really focusing on is upgrading the legal structures. And we have projects all over the world. We have taken 2 limited liability company operating agreements, the state of Colorado and the state of Nevada, and we've gutted them. So we have completely upgraded them to embed those 5 principles that we care about. We make them purposeful. We give it a new structure, a natural hierarchical structure. We make it visible and transparent. We make it such that there's no power held personally. So there's no construct of a owner or a founder that has power personally. That's why I introduced myself at the very beginning of the webinar as a founding member. It doesn't convey any special privilege. I don't have any special voting rights as a founder. I have investment stakes, and I have rights to expect return on my investment stakes for sure, but no special personal power or authority that's privileging the individual. So we embed these principles in legal structures, concrete legal structures that are valid and legitimate in local jurisdictions. So as I said, we have 2 valid structures, LLC structures in the states, Colorado and Nevada. And globally, we're working in the Netherlands with the BV structure. We are very near completion of a valid BV, which is a corporate/partnership structure in the Netherlands that embeds these very same principles. And we have another construct in Austria using the GmbH and something called a Co-KG, which is a limited partnership structure hybrid. And we're also working with companies in Switzerland, the UK, Canada, the Ukraine actually, and some interest in Argentina, Japan, and there's now some interest in China. So we're working with attorneys and new pioneers that are kind of unsatisfied with the current legal options available to them, because those legal structures are still based on 18th, 19th, 20th century constructs, voting rights, shareholders, privileged power holders, the ability to trump personally or egoically. We are changing that. This is huge. So we're aligning new legal structures with the same self-organizing principles that we've grown to love and expect in our organizational system. So one of the last bullets there is it shifts the fiduciary, if you're familiar with that term, the greater care or concern that most legal entities have to shareholders or profit, it shifts it to purpose. So this is what I meant when I said that we're shifting and creating legal structures that are legally anchored in for purpose. And just to kind of give you a sense concretely, we have 5 different agreements that have been encoded with these principles that are now valid in different jurisdictions all over the world. These are the usual suspects for those of you familiar with these kind of foundational agreements, operating agreements, membership grant agreements, confidentiality and IP agreements. The 2 bookends, the founding member agreement and the association agreement, are kind of unique to ENCODE. We've envisioned a new way for entrepreneurs to bootstrap these type of enterprises from scratch with a founding member agreement. That's kind of like a chain of custody around individual power holding and inspiration seeded into an organizational system, a for-purpose enterprise. So a new pathway for founders and entrepreneurs to launch for-purpose enterprises. And then on the right side of your screen, the association agreement is a new set of rules that encode culture and behavior norms that I'll talk about in that space. So we have legal agreements, and one little teaser I'll leave you with. We don't have time in our general webinar to dig into these details. But as I said, the focus of the company is the assets or the property. And conventionally, that gets described as shares. Some of you are familiar with owning shares. We create 4 classes of shares or membership interests. And we have the usual long-term capital interest. We also describe and make available profit interest, deferred interest, and something unique to ENCODE, dynamic allocation interests. And these are really cool tools, financial tools, to rethink capital structures, earnings program and compensation systems, the A units, the A dynamic allocation interests. ENCODE, one of the really interesting solutions to a really difficult problem, a predict and control problem that entrepreneurs have. When founders come together, how do you get to initial capital structure? And usually that's a predict and control affair, where there's 3 people, so it's a third, or 2 people, is it 50-50 or 60-40? It's all predictive, and you're really just kind of guessing. There are some formulas for sure, and some good books, and some logical reasoned approaches to it, but basically you don't know. So Mike Moyer, who wrote a book called Slicing Pie, was also seeing this problem and created a novel way of coming to an initial capital structure with something called dynamic equity to instill these dynamic steering principles into a system that allows you to delay the decision of capital structures until you do know, until you get some information. So long story short, we encoded those principles, those dynamic equity principles, into the base operating agreement to make them available for startups to dynamically allocate equity at the beginning or launch of a company or the launch of a new capital intensive project. So again, won't go into too much detail on those, but there are new financial instruments that allow you to play with the assets of the property of the company in new and unique ways, which is pretty cool. So let's go into the people matters. So if we no longer have a management hierarchy and we have a legal structure that no longer requires us to have employees, but full legal members holding membership interests, what do we do with the people? And where do they hang out? So ENCODE envisions a space specifically designed for individual humans to show up and hang out together. This is where culture lives in a for-purpose enterprise. This is a different structure, the association, connected to the other 2 structures. So one of the things that ENCODE is also working on is weaving all this together. So in a concrete way, not an aspirational way. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all hang out on purpose? Yeah, sure. How? With what rules? And how is that related to the organization and the legal structures? So what ENCODE is doing is tying it all together so that the legal agreements are compatible with the organizational agreements, the Constitution, and the association agreement. So the association container, like the other 2, has a focus. Its focus is the people. And it too has a set of rules, an association agreement that encodes how people will interact with one another. What are the social or behavior norms at play amongst and between the individuals that happen to care about this purpose? So this creates a space for purpose-aligned individuals. And I say that purpose-aligned, not like-minded. I think that is a common phrase that really doesn't quite get at what we want in a self-organizing system that integrates diverse perspectives. We're not looking for like-mindedness. We actually want disagreement and differing perspectives. It's one of the fundamental things that Holacracy does really, really well, is integrate the perspectives needed to move the organization towards its purpose. So in the association container, we want like-purposed individuals that have very disparate and diverse perspectives. But we want to have an agreement that binds them together and allows them to hang out with one another without killing each other. So there are social norms and behavior norms that allow us to start to re-envision all the things that we have grown accustomed to thinking about in respect to people issues in HR, OD. So professional development, career development, onboarding, recruiting, assessments, 360s, culture, mentorship, all of these people issues can now be reframed in a new container that is much more aligned with the way humans actually interact and want to interact with one another. So I think this is huge as well on both sides. The legal structures and now the people structures can be encoded with agreements and norms that are more conducive to the context. And in this context, it's about the people. It's about people hanging out together on purpose. And it feels like in this container that you get better human-to-human connections. You have a space now for processing personal tensions. This is one of the other big critiques of holacracy. I don't know how many of you are actually practicing or associated with this, but it's a chief complaint. And it's really an unfair one because it's true. Holacracy is not designed to provide a pathway to process your personal tension. In fact, it's designed to do exactly the opposite. It's to distinguish, to differentiate personal preferences and tensions with organizational need. So it's silent on the people issues, which has a whole lot of benefit, by the way, because you're free to figure out how you want to relate with your fellow workers by whatever definition. But the association agreement, what ENCODE is creating, is a new container that does, in fact, have a formal, defined, explicit personal tension processing system, a pathway to process personal tensions. Because of course personal tensions arise when humans come together. It's what we do. we bump into one another, we hone each other's edges, we support one another, and we piss each other off from time to time. And so we need a process by which we can unwind and decompress and learn from the tensions that naturally arise when we do work together. So this is what's going on in the association space, the association container. It too has a unique structure. So there's a structure to this. And it gives rise to everything being about purpose. So we have a container for the organization to express work for purpose. We have a container for the legal structures to be all about purpose, purpose-aligned assets and control. And we have a container of individuals that are gathered together to energize and express purpose into the world that they care about. And I think what this does, the broader implications of this is huge, in that it enables us to show up differently in the world, not as employees, but what's already kind of happening. You see it everywhere. It's the independent worker, the gig economy, the freelancer. In some jurisdictions, even in the United States, there's legislation afoot to try to categorize this new not really employee, not really contractor. What is it? And ENCODE, I think, is helping to flesh this out a bit. And the way we look at this is it is enabling the new emergent worker to show up, an independent agent of purpose who comes together and chooses consciously purposes that you care about and lends their energy, time, and talent to express that purpose into the world. So this is kind of a natural byproduct of the for-purpose enterprise. If you think about it, what it enables is a whole lot of autonomy as an independent agent of purpose to pick and choose different purposes that you care about. And there are now no longer restrictions on aligning yourself with those purposes. So it frees you up to have multiple relationships, multiple professional relationships with multiple enterprises. I kind of tongue-in-cheek think of this as polyamory for the professional. So it enables polyamorous work relationships now that are for purpose. And this is already happening, of course. People are no longer satisfied to be constrained with the one employer, one job construct. The whole gig economy and freelancer is just burgeoning, exploding all over the planet. And what this is doing is taking that reality and encoding it so that we can make it more scalable and invite more people to be purpose agents in the world, energizing more purpose that the world needs. So this is the new emerging worker, the purpose agent. And just to kind of bring this to a close before we open it up for any questions, ENCODE's work here is to create and encode these different containers, the for-purpose enterprise, the organizational space, the company space, and the association space. And this is complex. There's no doubt about it. Business is complex. No doubt about that either. We want to use 21st century tools, however, to take the complexity out of the system as much as possible and keep it relevant and simple for us purpose agents to express our work in the world. So simultaneous with the new legal and people structures, the work that we're engaged in with those agreements, we are creating software and a platform to encode those in software, to encode the agreements in software to make them smart or hyper agreements, to take advantage of 21st century ledgers like blockchain, to store these agreements, to make them legally grounded, and eventually to hold the assets that we care about, those membership units, profit interests, capital interests. So we are actively now creating software and a platform to connect independent agents of purpose with for-purpose enterprises designed to express purpose into the world, purposeful work into the world. So this is kind of ENCODE in a nutshell. We are upgrading the two systems, you might say, left behind by the current self-organizing movement, the company structures and the people structures, and creating new agreements to make them legitimate, grounded in concrete, actionable, and then taking the complexity out of that by creating software and a platform to enable the whole ecosystem to flourish. And so this is what we've been up to the last couple years. We have clients now all over the world, just getting our feet under us. It's the early pioneers stage. We're 2 years old, and we're just getting new companies ready to take next steps in their self-organization journey. We have workshops that we're offering both in the States and in Europe. Here's a couple that are coming up back in Europe later this fall in October. These one-day workshops give folks a experience of the containers and what's going on in them, and begins to give you information to assess whether your enterprise, your organization is ready for these next steps. So if you're so interested, I would love to see you at one of the workshops. And to learn more, we have Medium blog posts and other resources on the web. We have a newsletter that comes out periodically to keep folks that are interested up to date on our work and the platform and some of the new things that we're working on. So that's kind of the webinar orientation and framing, what we're up to at ENCODE, the 3 containers and how to learn more, and happy now to answer any specific questions you might have. All right, so Ra, can you look here?
Yeah, it looks like we've got some questions in the Q&A. Do you want to pull that up, Tom, or do you want me to pull that up?
Yeah, so we have one question when it fits in. I recently had a conversation with a self-organized company about purpose. The owner mentioned that he does not believe in a joint purpose because people won't share exactly the same purpose. He sees organization as an environment where people are stewards of capital provided by the organization to follow their own purpose. What is your take on this? Yeah, this question does come up quite a bit. Fred Lelou writes about evolutionary purpose. I spent a lot of time with him as he was doing background on the book. And of course, this is a foundational element of holacracy and a lot of the self-organizing systems. The premise is that the world needs something. Some work in the world is needed. And that work is represented by an entity's purpose, an evolutionary purpose of the enterprise that is separate, not joint, but separate. So I'm with the gentleman that the owner mentioned does not believe in a joint purpose. It's not a distillation of lowest common denominator sense of collective purpose. That's not what we're talking about here. We're actually talking about something separate from yourself and all the selves at play, that the enterprise itself has a purpose, and that purpose is evolutionary. And by definition, a self-organized structure is designed to steer towards its own purpose and discover its purpose over time, separate from the individuals who choose to energize the work in pursuit of that purpose. So it really teases apart, and it's not, evolutionary purpose is not your old school vision mission, or even Simon Sinek's why, getting to why. It's actually making another leap, saying that the enterprise itself and the structure and all the work associated with that structure is designed to express a separate purpose, independent of the individuals. And with that gap, you now have individuals that can choose whether that purpose is aligned with their personal purpose. So it honors both, but doesn't confuse the two. Hopefully that helps a little bit. It differentiates purpose, individual and organizational. Let's look at Grant. Is this for-purpose entity a new legal structure like a C Corp, public benefit corp? Yes, is the short answer. While it doesn't have a recognized distinction with a jurisdiction, like in the United States, there's not a P corporation or a purpose corporation or an FPE designation yet. But for all intents and purposes, if you look at the legal agreement, and those legal agreements are legitimate and grounded in the local jurisdiction, it is legally for purpose. Now, the next steps will be to test. All right, how about now? Great. All right, so let's see, David, version 4.1 of the Holacracy Constitution gives a rather special class of power that's not available to other partners. How do you address the situation? I would need a little bit more information on what part. 4.1 gives the ratifier a special class of power. The ratifier, yes. Article 5, adoption matters. Every Holacracy deployment starts with a ratifier. This is exactly the loophole that we want to close. So think about it. What we're doing here is making the legal entity itself the ratifier, which is absolutely true for Holacracy 1, by the way, and for ENCODE, and for the other organizations that are taking these next pioneering steps. The ratifier is not a person, but it's the legal entity. The operating agreement itself is what ratifies the Constitution. This is super powerful. And one of the key motivators for me to do this work was to close the personal loophole of having a personal power holder as ratifier. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit. If not, you can always come back. Let's see here. Next, does ENCODE assume Holacracy trained practitioners to use the structure? Yes. From ENCODE, and do startups have to pay a license fee? No license fee. What we're doing is working with early adopters in local jurisdictions, like in the Netherlands. Energize.org, some of you may know them. They are pioneering the legal BV structures. And then there will be services to help entrepreneurs take these next steps to work with local attorneys and their specific business and capital needs to create these new structures. But there isn't a licensing fee associated with that. And we are assuming right now holacracy practice as the base management and control system. We envision, we're kind of agnostic, and envision maybe other self-organizing systems being mature enough to do the work that we need it to do in this for-purpose enterprise structure. But right now, holacracy is the only one that meets the criteria that we have. And the criteria is based on three things. We need a very robust management and control system to make the legal moves that we're making. We can't do this otherwise. This work could not happen without a mature self-organizing operating system like holacracy that does three things. One, it's a complete replacement for management hierarchy, full stop. It has to be a complete wholesale replacement for management hierarchy. So whatever system that you specify as the management control system for the enterprise must meet that first criteria. The second criteria is it must also be a written down set of rules that bind everyone. So it can't just be a set of principles. It has to be a written rule set that we can point to. And third, and this is the one that hangs up most systems, competing systems in this space, it must encode no power personally. There are no personal power holders anywhere in the system. So if an organizational operating system meets those three criteria, complete replacement for management hierarchy, written down rule set, and no power held by any person anywhere, then it's a legitimate tool for the for-purpose enterprise. All right, let's see. Can you give an example of personal attention processes? Yeah, so there are tons of them out there. Nonviolent communication, appreciative inquiry, psychological type, developmental models to help us understand self and other better and to mediate when there are differences. So all of those are on the table. And what ENCODE is providing is a framework to integrate whatever personal tension processing system is best suited for the group of purpose agents collected. So we are curating some good ones, ones that we think are well suited for this space. But again, we're pretty open for anything that would be beneficial or useful for the specific set of people coming together. But that's an example of a tension processing system. Let's see, how are we doing here, Ra? Let me go down to, let's see, Grant. I'm going to go down to the bottom here with purpose, both individual and organizational, on the lips and minds of more and more individuals and companies. Yes. Is there a leadership gap that would organize all these benevolent impulses around a shared agenda, like say the UN, SDGs, becoming a North Star? Yeah, and is this not key to business becoming unified force for good? This comes up a lot, and I wouldn't say no. I resonate with what you're pointing to here, but one of the things about evolutionary purpose, it tends to be a little more neutral and open to whatever is needed, including UN SDGs, or whatever is the North Star of the enterprise. So it doesn't discriminate. It's all about purpose. So whatever purpose you want to seed in to a for-purpose enterprise gets the ball rolling, the pump primed, if you will. So I do have a lot more to say about how to come to that evolutionary purpose and what type of leaders are sensing into and distilling and discovering evolutionary purpose. But we aren't prescribing our hard coding purpose. Not to say that that is a bad thing. That's gotten us a long way down the road. And the Millennial Development Goals and the other goals set by benevolent organizations, the whole B Corp, the for-benefit corporate structure, these are hard-coded values. Nothing wrong with that, of course. But it does push against some of the self-organizing principles of being dynamic and self-steering and evolutionary. anytime you hard code something, you're pushing against some of those key principles. So you want a system that is plastic and flexible enough to morph and change over time while pursuing purposes that are meaningful to the folks that are energizing them. So a lot more to say on that. I like the question. It is, again, pointing at a distinction between evolutionary purpose and goals and values that we humans have. And these are separate things, related but separate. Let's see. Let's see here. I'm just scanning through some of the questions. Let's see. Brooks says, you say you've developed 2 LLC replacement agreements. How exactly do you do this? I'm imagining this is much harder in a corporate context. That's very true, with board fiduciary duties, etc. Yes, indeed. So our first move is to work with local attorneys. In this case, we had an attorney help us with the Nevada LLC and an attorney help us with the Colorado LLC. And we chose LLC because it was the most plastic or flexible structure. So there are about 24 key shifts that need to be encoded in the legal agreement. And so we need to pick a legal structure that will allow us the flexibility to make these shifts. And to your point, a classic C Corp in the US would not allow us to do this. And there are structures internationally that are designed to be more corporate biased and less partnership biased, more code oriented, another legislative code, as opposed to contractual or civil agreements between partners. So not get too deep into the weeds, but you're pointing to what Encode is doing is working to find the right starting point, which is key to this work. Finding an existing legal structure that's valid, that gives us the flexibility to encode the key principle shifts that we need to affect the changes we want. All right, so let's see. So I assume implementing your unit holding framework is great for newly created companies. How easy is it to shift to this framework for existing companies? We do both, and we have some experience with both. We call the new companies bootstrapping. It's essentially startup kind of work, getting to initial capital structures, the dynamic equity stuff. In that structure, it's about getting to your initial capital or your cap table, your equity table. And that's a bit easier than trying to deal with converting an ongoing operation with an already existing capital structure into the new structure. But you can do that. It's a conversion of one form to another. So there are rules at play on how to transfer or convert your legal structure from one legal structure to a new legal structure. And we just follow those rules. But in both cases, again, we didn't spend any time at all on these membership interests or these financial instruments. But in both cases, we have profit interests, both deferred and current profit interests that allow us to pay people as legal members, not as employees, moving away from salaries and conventional compensation system to something else. And that is actually relatively easy to deploy, but a big cultural shift for the individual who's accustomed to receiving a paycheck. And if you're in the United States, that paycheck usually gets taxes deducted and you have tax implications. So it does get kind of complex, but we believe the benefits far outweigh the downsides in that. And we have navigated those pathways. Let's see, we have a couple more. Let's see. I'm just kind of scanning through these if you'll indulge me a second.
Is there a relationship between the association that you mentioned and what we traditionally understand as an association, a legal entity? Yeah, I love that question. Um, yes, over time. That's a point in time question. We're starting modestly. So each for purpose enterprise that we're working with, we help that enterprise establish its association, kind of beginning, middle, and simple. But these associations, and to your point, could be anchored in a broader association of, let's say, Purpose Agents International, and create a holarchic structure of purpose agents who have interests beyond a specific enterprise or interest across multiple enterprises and interest at higher levels across the entire ecosystem. So we are actually working with structures right now. We have a couple of projects to explore what would a legal entity, the Association of Purpose Agents International, look like, and what would be the advantages of structuring that way. Yeah, I love that question. All right, so let's see. I had a couple of similar questions. And let's see, we're coming up on top of the hour. Kind of down at the bottom again. Sounds like this could be both a for-purpose and a for-profit form, as long as distributions are delivered to individuals delivering on a bigger purpose. Yeah, it's both and. It's one of the beauties. It's an integrating different poles here. It's neither a for-profit nor a not-for-profit. It is literally for purpose. And the profit interests, the shares, the investments, the assets can be deployed and shared with individuals who are helping to express that purpose into the world. So for-profit and not for-profit tend to be tax distinctions and not really organizational distinctions that have any meaning about expressing work. They tend to be governmental, tax, and corporate finance related, and much less about expressing work into the world. So we're changing that, and we are saying that it's neither a for-profit nor is it a not-for-profit, but it is quite literally for purpose that has the benefits of using its capital assets any way it wants to help express purpose in the world. Let's see. Andrew, hey, is there an available marketplace for FPE shares? Not yet, but that coming soon piece with the platform and the blockchain and some of the things that are going on there around exchanges in general. There's a whole movement, of course, in trying to energize ecosystems or tokenize ecosystems, if you're familiar with that term, in the blockchain cryptocurrency world. So this is on our radar as well, but it's small steps, staying pretty grounded on the first moves that will enable us to do these bigger moves down the road. Let's see. All right. So we just got a few more. We got that one. Kind of going back through the list, folks. We did the tension processing system. We did the NGOs. And the licensing. I think we have most. Just have another one. What do you need to advance your agenda, and how can we help? Pioneers, explorers, organizations that are ready to take the next leap in self-organizing beyond just the work. Or if you're contemplating an enterprise from scratch and ready to bootstrap a for-purpose enterprise, engaging with us around that endeavor. So we're looking for pioneers that are ready to take these next steps with us. Working in our existing legal jurisdictions, that would be the Netherlands, Austria, and the US, or some of our early jurisdictions, Switzerland, to help create these new legal structures. If you happen to be home-based in other parts of the world and have connections with attorneys or are seasoned entrepreneurs in your own right and are ready to kind of pioneer, we'd love to talk to you about being that anchor in the local jurisdiction to create these new for-purpose enterprise structures wherever you may be. So those are some of the ways that you can help. And thanks for the question. All right, let's see, just had another one. The role of evolutionary purpose reminds me of Stuart Kaufman's notion of adjacent possible paths, maybe conversations. What mechanisms ensure that for-purpose enterprises avoid creating too many possible futures, which could destroy their own? Yeah, that's a beautiful question. The short answer, I don't know what your experience, Chad, is with Holacracy. But the tool, one of the cornerstone tools or components of Holacracy practice is governance. It's the decision-making process to answer this question. What should the enterprise be paying attention to? And what kind of purpose should it be pursuing based on current data? Back to that, as much visibility and transparency as you can stomach comment. So based on the actual reality of the work we're doing, what should we be paying attention to pursue our purpose? And in the doing of that work, grounded in that reality, do we now have a better understanding of what our purpose is? So it pushes against personal preference and aspirational thinking and keeps you locked into reality, grounded into what's actually happening and what's actually implementable, executable, doable based on current constraints. Much more to say about this. In our legal agreement, we define purpose and we get super specific on what that is to keep it grounded in what's actually occurring, not get confused with all the myriad or field of possibilities that can destroy an organization for sure. Love the question. Yes, it's about focus. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of a self-organizing system is it's focused on purpose and has mechanisms to always be in that question and taking steps towards that purpose based on reality. Grant, what's Encode's revenue model? And did I hear something about licensing agreements? No licensing agreements. So we intend to open source all the legal structures. We want as many for-purpose enterprises as possible out in the world. And quite frankly, as many agents of purpose energizing work for for-purpose enterprises as possible. So no licensing around that. Our revenue model is primarily in the software and the platform we're developing to enable and catalyze this activity and monetize the activity in a meaningful way for those that are benefiting from the connections made and the opportunities that are derived from the platform itself. So it's a two-step business model, kind of priming the pump to get both enterprises and agents into the world, and working with legal structures and charging professional service fees to get that done. Training, education, and awareness building is another revenue stream, but those are just means to an end. And the primary business model or financial model is all embedded in the platform. Hopefully that answers your question there. All right, I think we have knocked them out. I see we talked about, Linda has maybe clarified distinct in terms like enterprise and organization. Yeah, so I do use these terms a lot now, just because of my own experience and habit. There's a distinction. Organization to me is something very specific. It's about the work and a rule set, constitution, holacracy, roles, accountability. When I talk about the enterprise, it's the whole piece. It's the entire cohesive structure of that, the organization, along with the legal grounding and the people. And much more to say about how all that structure gets held together. But I do make that distinction for sure between organization and enterprise. And I think we've just worked through all of the questions. So unless there are any other burning questions, we're 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We scheduled 90 minutes for this session. Thank you all for attending. We still have several folks on the call, which is good. You hung around to the end. Would love to hear more from you. So if you're interested in this work, by all means, go to our website. Best way to connect is sign up for the newsletter. There's also a place to ask your questions and engage with us. So please take advantage of that, and we'll get back to you. If you're interested in us coming to you, there's a way of unlocking your city for a workshop, and we can show up in your area and work with you with your professional network. So all that's available. Please, if you're so inclined and interested, stay connected that way, and we'd love to see you and work with you in the future. So with that, thank you all very much. Really appreciate the questions, and that was a lot of fun. So have a good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and hope to see you again soon.